there was a Congress of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which was held in April of 1941, some 2 months prior to the war. At that Congress, a number of resolutions were adopted. One of the resolutions, and it was number 17 on the agenda, interestingly enough, it was number 17 amongst political resolutions, so certainly not a priority resolution, which is often cited by Mr. Himka and others who disparage UPA. However, they don't cite the resolution to its very end. The resolution states pretty much that the Jews were the underpinning of Bolshevism. And that's the portion of the resolution that Mr. Himka and his people, they cite. However, the resolution goes on to say the following. It says, but Ukrainians should not be misled. Ukrainians have to recognize that the enemy is Moscow. This resolution and others have often been taken as an example of the fact, and Mr. Himka acknowledges this in his document, in his essay on the Lviv pogroms, that OUN was opposed to pogroms. And his argument regarding what transpired in Lviv in 1941, in July of 1941, was that somehow the Germans had convinced them that if you follow suit, if you work with us, we will recognize Ukrainian independence. But there is a memorandum some 2 weeks prior to July 1st, 1941, that was delivered by the OUN to Hitler or Hitler's people, in which they state unequivocally that we in this particular instance, welcome your appearance as an actor in this particular struggle. However, if you fail to recognize an independent Ukrainian state, and if you go against it, then you will find that Ukrainians are your worst enemies. There isn't a single document which can be found among the documents of the OUN archives, except for purported documents which were found in Soviet archives. Amazingly enough, these documents that have been found that allegedly they incriminate OUN, and they don't necessarily incriminate OUN. They suggest that OUN was responsible or was suggestive or was instrumental in forming the Ukrainian militia and the auxiliary police. That's all it says, all right? But nowhere do they say that there was actual pogroms that were called upon by the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. Now, there are a number of problems with these documents. Mr. Himka is about to present to you 3 such documents. And they're interesting. I've seen those documents. They come from Mr. Carynnyk research in Soviet archives. Mr. Carynnyk accepted those and other documents at face value. He did absolutely no forensic analysis, absolutely nothing. He took a document, all right? He didn't search for a witness who could identify and authenticate that document, and he simply submitted it as if it were a legitimate document. Now, in a law, those documents would never be admitted into evidence. Consequently, what is now amongst those documents? There are documents which are clear forgeries. There is an alleged autobiography written by Yaroslav, which his own wife stated after she saw that is not his signature. Yet Mr. Carynnyk, in his article with Mr. Prof, goes on to say, well, she may deny that that's his signature, but we know better. But even Mr. Himka today will probably acknowledge that document is a fabrication. All right? So my suggestion is that inasmuch as we've been preparing for today's discussion for some time, Mr. Himka has 8 documents or exhibits that he would like to submit into evidence, all right, or into this discussion. Let him do so. I would assume that since he's had all this time to prepare for it, this is the best evidence that he can come up with. And I'm telling you beforehand, a priori, that these documents have no authentication, no identification, nor have they been ever forensically tested.
There's many more things that Mr. Lozynskyj said that, deserve some comment before I get to the documents. It's not true that I don't quote the April 1941 resolution to the end. I do quote it to the end, almost always. You referred, Mr. Lozynskyj, to Himka and his people. I should not be mixed up with what other scholars say or do. I am myself. I do not tell Marko Carynnyk what to do or Per Anders Rudling. I've been often accused of being a sort of Professor Moriarty who does everything. No, that's not the case. These are individuals with their own agendas as well. Some of them I know better, some of them I know worse. Will these documents that I'm about to show hold up in a court of law? No. Historical evidence and judicial evidence are quite different. The kind of certainty you have to have, for a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt is very different than what historians have to do, which is try to figure out what happened. And there I'm going to say right away, and I'll probably come back to this point, that if all this stuff, the evidence that I'm going to show, exists, then something has to be explained. Like, then if they don't prove what I say they prove, well, what do they show then? What do they mean? How did they get there? I know about Bandera's memorandum to Hitler. It was Yevhen Stakiw, I believe, delivered it. I know what it said. It basically said that don't think that the Reich can establish a Ukrainian puppet state where it won't stand for that. I will point out that that was put out, that was done before the declaration of renewal of statehood on the 30th of June, 1941. And that makes a difference because among the documents, and among many other documents, you will see that already in July, they're asking for Bandera and Stetsko to be released for the recognition of Ukrainian statehood and for the victory of the German army. Mr. Carynnyk research in Soviet archives. There are no other archives that actually have all these OUN documents. These are captured OUN documents. And his study, which you refer to, goes to the length of actually showing you pictures of the documents, and I've taken 3 from there, but they're also available elsewhere. You can go directly to the archives and see them, and not just the one archive, but the more, for some of them, because the leaflets in particular were spread among various archives. Now, are all Soviet documents then falsified? Then how do we do research on the famine? Do we have to discount all those things? Do we have to discount everything we find in the SBU files? I mean, why is Mr. V'ятровich opening them up if he doesn't think that they're genuine documents? Furthermore, all the documents, or most, I believe all the documents that I'm just not 100% sure at the moment because I didn't expect this kind of a line of attack, but the documents, the first 3 documents, are reproduced, not reproduced, but transcribed and published in a document that was edited by, included in its editorial board, Yaroslav Dashkevych, who was definitely pro-nationalist and was arrested and served time in prison for links with OUN, and by Vasyl, who was the last leader of UPA. So they accepted it, but Mr. Lozynskyj somehow feels that anything that comes out of a Soviet archive must be false. Well, I disagree. Now, on the autobiography of Stetsko, absolutely it's not a falsification. Absolutely. There's only one article which tries to say it's a falsification, and the main points are that it has a mistake in in Stakiw's biography, but as Taras Kurylo has shown very clearly, it was not a mistake. Professor Hunczak did not know enough about the history of the OUN to realize that there were two periodicals called Ideya and Chin. And second of all, Taras Hunczak said that the language was not like Stakiw's language. But in fact, I was able to, thanks to Orest Martynowych, who called my attention to an article that Stakiw wrote in 1938 in a Canadian Ukrainian newspaper called Zhidivstvo i My, Jewry and Us, where I found exactly the same phrases used 4 or 5 times. So I'm convinced that it is a real thing. And you also look at the historical circumstances of its production, you can understand what he's saying. So I defend that.